Welcome everybody to the 7th of our online conversations about cultivating wisdom in these challenging times. And 7 is a wondrous number. 7 wonders of the world, 7th day. And we have a really wondrous topic today, the wisdom of hope. And through the wonder of Zoom, I'm shooting over to 2 hours south of Montreal to find Harry Hutson. There you are, Harry. Is that you there? You have to speak so I can get your picture. There you go.
I am here. Thank you.
Thank you. In New York State, just south of Montreal. Yeah. And Harry, before we embark, I need to introduce you to our listeners and see how I do on my introduction. Because, Harry, I've got you as a leader of many years, senior positions in multinational companies, leader of non-profit organizations, an author, most recently Navigating Organisational Crisis, 2016, 2006, Putting Hope to Work. If I might call you an agent for a better world, an activist for a better world, infused by a deep sense of purpose. And from my experience in the past months, a wonderfully engaging conversationalist. And so good to join you on this question of the wisdom of hope. And I want to start by quoting you. And here's what I read in the last couple of days as we've been thinking about this. Hope, often misunderstood, underestimated, ignored and belittled, has been a favourite topic of mine for years. Hope is an impractical idea that turns out to be useful, especially in times of need. So Harry, why have you chosen hope? Or perhaps why has hope chosen you?
Oh, that's the essence right there. So, and the big question in my mind these days is, to what degree do we choose hope, and to what extent does hope choose us? And that's what I'm pondering a lot these days. For me, it's a very, very important question. But I want to answer your question, which is, how did I choose hope, or how did hope choose me? I believe that the writing of people, the thinking of people, the speaking of people is almost entirely coming up out of their own experience. And so, in my experience, I've had moments where I truly needed hope. Did I choose it? Did it choose me? It was there. It got me through some sticky wickets, got me through some family issues, it got me through some career problems. And I'm an executive coach too, and partly because I've made so many mistakes and I've been up against it for so many times that I can reflect on it and talk about how it all turned out. So I think reflecting on one's history, we say in our field that we understand our careers looking backward. And so in some ways I'm looking backward and hope looks forward. So if I can weigh those two equally, I'll be living in the present, put it that way.
So it was there for you, sometimes on sticky wickets. And just what's your sense of what it is? I mean, as we've talked about it being a very ephemeral thing. But what is hope for you?
Well, for me, let me talk about what it does. And
sure.
The question about what is hope is a question I find fascinating, because every time I ask someone, I get a different answer. And there are scads of answers out there, wonderful poetic answers, wonderful scientific answers about what is hope. And so why I come down is, what does it do? And I think it does two things. It uplifts your mood. It gives you a sense of wellness when perhaps you felt completely either undeserving or unable to achieve that good feeling. And secondly, get you moving. Now, here's one of the questions: do you move and that evokes hope, or does hope get you moving? And that's a positive cycle, a generative cycle. But movement has got to be a part of hope. It is a part of hope. And that separates it from things like optimism, which we throw around quite freely. Optimism is free. You have no stake in it. So that doesn't do anything. Hope commands your attention. And the reward is, again, you do good things and you feel better about yourself.
Commands your attention, uplifts mood. I noticed when you talked about it, and actually sometimes uplifts mood when we really need it, under stress or strain or real pressure. and gets us moving. Again, from your work, I read a quote, Ernst Bloch in the 1950s, who wrote about this, and you brought this to my attention, that the work of this emotion hope requires people who throw themselves actively into what is becoming, to which they themselves belong. That's a sense of movement, a sense of a better place, I guess.
Yes, and I know that, and I think that's a very good summary of an important essence of hope. And now, the question it presents is, well, what do you do to enact it or invite it in? Do you get to be hopeful if you're out doing bad things in the world? And I guess there's a moralistic shrink in me that says, no, you don't get hope. You get something else. Maybe you get delight, or maybe you get perverse delight. If you say, well, that dastardly deed really performed well. Okay, so you feel good about your infamy, but that's not me. I think the kind of work you have to do has to make things better for yourself and others. And so that there's a constant interaction here between action and feeling that I'm amazed by, and want to talk to people about more. It's not one-sided, just go do, and it's not also just go feel. See how these two things can reinforce each other and interact.
The combination of the two, do, feel, and you've written and spoken very vividly on what it asks of us to choose hope. Might I invite you to talk a little bit about that with us, Harry, about when we choose it, what do we need to do to choose it effectively?
Well, I like thinking about different choices we can make in choosing hope. So one of the things that Julian, you and I know a lot about and think a lot about is purpose. And it turns out that when you're clear about your purpose, and your purpose is a good one, you're choosing hope. You're finding your way in the world. You're giving yourself intentionality. You're giving yourself agency, and that's ready ground for hope to come in and be there right by your side. And so, in my one of my coaching clients is a leader in a factory that's making pharmaceuticals. And he's really clear about his purpose, and that transmits to the purpose of the factory and the company he's in. The pharmaceuticals he makes, for example, are keeping his own family alive. Huh. And the factory he is in a part of the U.S. that has suffered multiple times in losses from manufacturing sector. And he knows what that's like when communities get hollowed out and lose jobs. And so he's got this personal purpose. He wants to look at the community, and he also a personal purpose about he's attached to the drugs he's making. And this says that's what we do in this factory. We look out for each other. Safety is important. Social responsibility is important as well. And so it all comes out. And as I visited this place of work, I find it to be very uplifting, very purposeful. And so I see how all these things kind of come together in a good way. And so those are choices having to do with purpose, and worthy purpose after all. Another issue I'm thinking about a lot is how do we make choices that bring in hope. There's a movement here that's struggling right now. It's all in the news, and it's all about how do we reform the police systems in our country. And as you know, chokeholds can be deadly, and police have not had either the self-discipline or the oversight to improve their practices a lot of ways, and sometimes they make things worse. And so the movement that's popped up is something called defund the police, and that's been a lightning rod question. It's going back and forth among all our political candidates. What does that mean? Get rid of the police or not? Well, it turns out defund the police is a very big idea. It means let's find policemen who want to be community policemen, not warriors, And let's take some of the money that we need to save from police departments that are overfunded and put that into social services. Now, this idea is just barely catching on, but in a very short period of time, it's gained adherence. And is a good news is it's a topic in every political conversation, it seems, of the day. Now, here's an idea where a big idea, it will take something like getting rid of slavery, like women's suffrage, will take some time to play out. But it's a big, good idea. And that brings hope. It brings hope to lots of people who have studied this problem of police brutality every which way you can and haven't arrived at any kind of idea. And I think what's going on now is a coagulation of thinking that it's going to cause progress. Already, police departments are revising their rules on restraints. So for me, a big idea, when you attach yourself to it, also invites hope. So those are two examples. I can think of more.
Well, I mean, real sense. So if we think about the lifeblood of hope, the scaffolding on when it's constructed, you're saying two things here so far, aren't you? One is about purpose, individual and collective purpose, being a lightning purpose, but also a sense of potential, a sense of possibility, a sense of opening up, like the defund police idea that attracts attention. And I guess I assume from what you said earlier that action also is a part of the lifeblood of hope, of movement, of do.
Well, I've been very, very influenced by a recent book about anti-racism that says the way to make progress, social progress, is not first to go out and change hearts and minds and then assume that that's going to make a difference in terms of policy or inequity. It's the opposite. Do some things that will reverse trends that are leading toward inequity. Do some things that will be good for the community, and that will change minds. And so it's, where do you start with this? And I think it's an age-old question among us who are activists or social scientists. Where do you start? And my sense is you start by making progress. And you make progress by seeing some little fires that have been lit, little forays that are being successful, and you build on those and you connect those up. And suddenly there is progress, there's momentum, and that's what changes minds. And that for me is the hope's formula. You don't sit around and ruminate. What you do is you basically get off your duff and put yourself to work.
So purpose, potential, movement into action, however small, but starting. I've heard you also talk about connection with others, connection of the sense of community. I suppose that's implicit in what you're saying about your factory, for instance, community. Is that important too for you?
It absolutely is. Now here, the community side is, yes, do things with others. So I really started thinking about hope years ago in terms of leadership. How can leaders lead better? And clearly getting buy-in among the workforce, being democratic, if you will, reducing hierarchy, finding ways for people to own the change you're trying to make. All of that for me is doing things together. What I'm seeing now is something a little bit different. So there's this, we talk about Black Lives Matter here, and there's no one in charge. There is a group called Black Lives Matter, but no one's in charge of this sea change in consciousness that we're all experiencing. How is that going on? So it's not like a leader. We don't have Martin Luther King right now kind of spurring us on. There's some spontaneity going on here. There's some stuff that's coming up out of the earth, if you will, that I consider to be very hopeful. And so for years and years and years, I was thinking, well, hope is something, it's almost a transaction. It's something you go get yourself involved in good purpose and be open and so forth, and you'll invite in hope. Now I'm having, if you will, a contrary view, another side of the other side of the coin that says sometimes hope has got its own ideas. Sometimes hope is on its own recognizance and it'll be there and you don't know how or why. And that's the essence of social movements. You know, suddenly we're all in it together. We're seeing the same goal. Suddenly we're feeling unity and solidarity. And I don't think that's, you know, read any social organizer and say, well, how do you pull that off? They don't know. I mean, I talk about organizing and so forth, but when it's there, I think hope is sort of leading the way. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and take us into that, Harry, about it's there. I mean, it was implicit in our early dialogue about why did you choose it? Has it chosen you? I mean, your phrase is there. It comes out of the earth. It's suddenly there. It's not a transaction. It's got its own ideas. Help us understand that. Help us touch that.
Well, I think we have to think differently than we do most of the time. We can't be reductionist and think about materiality of all the things that we do, and how do you count them, and how do you find leverage and what that. I think we have to think that there's something else going on that we don't really know, and that's why I quote Paul the Apostle, who talks about, well, if it's not there, you wait for it, and how hope is unseen, or as Rebecca Solnit talks about, it's in the dark. I think we have to posit that other version of hope that I've been wary of looking at forever, because when I talk to leaders about that stuff, they say, well, what do you do with it? I mean, how do you get that? And so that's problematic in itself. Since we're talking about wisdom, what I know about wisdom is that it's a both and proposition. It's not either or. It's not dichotomous. And I think hope is right there. It's both and, both something you can do to, if you will, evoke or attract hope, and something that hope might want to do with or for or to you. And that to me is a marvelous, marvelous insight. Now, it's not easy to talk about this because we'll see, now it confuses people. What am I supposed to do? Should I just wait, or should I go do something? Well, who the hell knows? Who the hell knows? But I might say, well, tell me about your experience of hope. And then off we'd go with your stories and all the rest of it. And and that in itself would be a deepening of understanding and a deepening of philosophy and spirituality. And maybe also get people to move when they can. I just become into awareness of the very end of life, and how hope emerges in the final moments when medical science has reached its limit. And now, how about the hospice workers, the physicians, the people around you, the family members? What's their role, and what's happening at that moment? And it seems to me we end up again with the case where hope emerges. And there are many, many cases of people, when all is said and done, are feeling like they're at an end, and it's living in the moment end. And it's not a one of striving for, can't we do one more thing, doctor? Can't you extend my life? That's over. And now I'm in a very here and now place. And the way we help there, maybe this is a hopeful act, is that we let that be, and we acknowledge that that's what's going on. And we don't make lies about, oh, don't worry, or medical science will come up with a cure tomorrow. We don't, or you're not in really bad shape, or whatever we say because we're uncomfortable with that. But we let that be, and then again, there's hope. There's hope at the end, and that to me is a very refreshing and comforting notion that when I get to that place, I'm not going to need another shot. I'm not going to need someone giving me some advice or whatever, or trying to console me. I'm going to need someone to be with me. Yeah. And that to me is again the other side of hope, the essence of hope, when it's there for you. I can't call it up. At those final moments, I don't think I may be barely conscious, who knows, but there's hope. So that's what I'm playing with here, Julian. And how do we combine these two understandings?
It's deeply moving, Harry, deeply moving. And I mean, I've heard you talk about this before around the notion of intrinsic motivation, deep-seated. It's there waiting for us. And these themes that you've been exploring right now about both and emergent and in the dark and unknown have been running through all our conversations. And here we are again with these profound themes. And one of the things I know you talk about is archetypes and classical literature. And you've talked about Hermes as being a sort of symbol of this. I wonder, because I find that really helpful, this notion of a figure that can characterize this.
Yes.
Talk about
that. I've admired people who can pull up understandings of archetypes, and I've been and studied with them for many years. Do not mistake me for someone like that. I do know enough about archetypes to say they are not metaphors.
Yeah.
They have a life of their own. And whether you popularize them and talk about well, you take a test and here's your archetype. I'm not on that page. I do think that archetypes are really extraordinarily deep and important and powerful, and people who, it's a way to understand what's going on. And so Hermes is what we know about him. He's a trickster god. He's a messenger god. He's the god of roads, for gosh sake. He is the only god who could go back and forth between the living and the dead, between consciousness and unconsciousness. And he's quick as the devil, or not the devil, but he's quick as a god. And so the notion here is that Hermes is teaching us a lot. He can teach us a lot. I mean, Lewis Hyde certainly has deep understanding of Hermes the trickster. What I see here is that Hermes sort of opens up an understanding of things that are difficult to control, in fact, are not in our control. And yet he's delivering messages, and he can show up at the right time. And he's also a friendly God. He's a God that we can not exactly trust because he's a trickster, but he's a God that can be there for us. And it's holding a caduceus with two snake heads on it. One is poisonous and one is healing. And so here we go again. Isn't that the symbol of hope? Don't we need both sides? So this thing about darkness is about hope. If you exclude hope's shadow, if you exclude the bad things that are going on with the good things, you're probably setting off in the wrong direction. You're trying to eliminate parts of reality that can provide direction for you and can actually be there for you too. We had this dichotomous view of the world again: good, bad, light, dark, and bad. We don't want any bad. Well, hope doesn't go there. So again, an archetypal view would say hope is powerful because it includes misery and hopelessness. It's powerful because it accepts death and mortality and misery. That's why it's so powerful. And if we can get to a point where we're living in the moment, or if we can get to the point where we're getting off our chair and getting off and doing something besides being mired and wishing and hoping, not hoping, but a lot of false hoping, but wishing the things to be better without doing anything to make them better, then I say we're beginning to realize the complexity of all of this. Now, it's not easily talked about or communicated. And at least, I'm sitting here right now saying all these things, realize I'm wide open to anybody who's listening to this and say, yeah, but. And I go, and my answer is exactly.
Yes, and you've taken on an extraordinary journey through talking about hope, about what it is, both action and feeling, about if we choose it, we might pay attention to purpose, to potential, to action. And yet it chooses us. It's there. It can be emergent in the dark, in the unknown. It has these features that Hermes describes, dark and light there through transitions, sort of magical features of it. And immensely resourceful and comforting. I could go on in my summary, but I wonder, Harry, if now we might just turn the last few minutes to, so from this, as you look out into, I was going to say your world of the States, but the world generally, and to the work of leaders, what would be your observations? I mean, how hopeful are you now, for instance, as you look at what's going on around you? And what might you say to those of us who lead communities in our daily lives that we might pay more attention to on this front of hope? I don't want to develop as a transaction, but you see where I'm coming from.
Right. So let's look inside. And one thing Hermes does is it invites us on an inward journey.
Yes.
And so I will certainly freely admit or confess to feeling despair. The news every day brings so many stories that on the face of them look absolutely disastrous, whether it's COVID-19 or it's what's happening in the streets of some of the cities in the U.S. and the response of our federal government to bring in stormtroopers to quell what they see as unrest, which is all these sorts of things. These are, on the surface of them, look like we're going backwards. And I would invite anyone on who is feeling hopeful to not deny that, yet also not to be overwhelmed by what seems to be reported. I mean, what gets reported obviously is the extremes wipe out the means, and so we have to understand that. But more important, we have to accept these negative turns, these steps back in our progress, as being part of the process. And so I'm completely hopeful. So what's happening on the streets of Portland, Oregon right now? Well, we have these federal troops in their unmarked vans trying to police a group of people now who are wearing yellow shirts and bicycle helmets, who are mothers and holding up signs, mothers and grandmothers. And for me, that's, now who designed that? How'd that come up? And so we have a struggle. Can we be hopeful about how the struggle will end? Can this happen? That's the page I'm always on. And that is to say, I have to use my imagination. I have to admit that there's some real negativity out there. There's some evil. Understand all that. And yet, for me, it's a matter of being on a journey that says, all right, let's reflect, let's think, let's not give in, let's not give up or give in. And let's try to reframe. And so my inward journey is always about reframing. And it's always about seeing the course of progress. You know, the arc of justice is long, and I think the arc of hope is even longer.
And, you know, on those words, we might pause, Harry. That sense of reframing, seeing the progress, that is a voice of hope in itself, isn't it? And it's a quote you gave me, so I haven't gone and found this, but it's, I think I'd like to finish with it because it's such an uplifting thing. Václav Havel, Czech president, writer, wrote, "Hope is not prognostication." I had to look prognostication up, not prophesying. It's an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart. It transcends the world that is immediately experienced, is anchored somewhere beyond its horizons. That's what you've been talking about. It's being in the present, however dark that might be, but hope takes us to somewhere beyond its horizons.
I will want to say one thing about, maybe this is my closing comment. I'm not aware of the clock right now. I want to thank you, Julian, for the frame that you've given me. It came out of nowhere. Thank you, Hermes. And that is, and I'll pose that question, isn't hope a form of wisdom? Now, you know, before this journey that you and I are on, that had never occurred to me. I never had that frame. For me, that's really uplifting to think of it that way.
Thank you, Harry. And I'd like to toast 3 H's to finish. Hermes and Harry Hutson. Thank you so much, Harry.
And a J. Thank you, Julian.
Thanks.
Okay.